Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 546. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about the UN and Red Cross, large pots of melted cheese, a big jet of water, and buildings built for Smurfs, as we go to Geneva, Switzerland. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. As you're making your travel plans this year, I hope you're planning on joining us in either Japan or in India. But now, let's talk about Geneva. I'd like to welcome to the show Leyla Giray Alianak, who's come to talk to us about Geneva, Switzerland. Leyla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So we're talking about Geneva. You want to put that on the map of Switzerland for us?
If you look at Switzerland face on, it's in the lower left-hand corner. It looks like a little tongue that sticks into France.
And you live in the region of, although not in the city of Geneva.
That's right. I used to live in Geneva. I've lived in about 10 different places around Geneva, but Geneva has such a huge housing shortage that if you live in the city, you often end up living next door in France. And so there's an entire community of people who live in neighboring France who commute into Switzerland, into Geneva to work every day. It's all very pleasant, lovely rolling hills, and sometimes you can't really tell whether you're in Switzerland or France, but it's right next door.
Excellent. And why should someone come to Geneva?
Oh, my goodness, it's a wonderful city. Geneva is one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. It's really, really a wonderful place to visit. It's a great place to live. First of all, it's at the very center of Europe. So one of the things that people really like about Geneva is that they can get out of it easily. We have EasyJet here. Absolutely. We can fly out of Geneva to 56 different cities in Europe and in North Africa and in the Middle East for maybe $80 round trip pretty much all year. So that's a wonderful reason to be in Geneva. But apart from that, there's the natural beauty of the city. It is absolutely gorgeous. It sits on a lake on two banks. It's ringed by two mountain ranges. You've got the Alps on one side, the Jura on the other. all along the lake on both the Swiss and the French side, because the lake is divided into two. You've got picturesque villages. You've got the wonderful water fountain. It's a safe city. It's easy to get around. It's got a beautiful old town. Geneva has chocolate, and that is not negligible. And then it's also a city that has a lot of culture. On the history side, of course, it's a center of Reformation and the chosen home of Calvin, if you recall. There's a huge museum of the Reformation that's just opened here. And then it's also a very international city in the sense of a humanitarian city. It's also called the capital of peace and freedom. It's home to the UN's European headquarters. It's home to the International Red Cross and Red Crescent. The UN Refugee Agency is here, so is the Agency for Human Rights. The world's largest particle accelerator is located here. That's a big, huge ring that goes underground between Switzerland and France, and which makes atomic particles collide with one another. That's not a very scientific explanation, but it's the largest machine in the world.
I would say it was relatively accurate within my knowledge of particle physics. Now, is that something we can tour, though?
Absolutely. There is a tour.
Really?
You used to be able to go down into the bowels, but now that it's all up and running, the tour is a little more restricted, but it's definitely worth seeing. Absolutely. And there's a bus that takes you right to the door. And then also in Geneva, or right near Geneva, you've got all the world's major international environmental organizations. You've got places like the headquarters of the World Wildlife Fund, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So all of that is in Geneva. And then you've also got major fairs here, things like the International Motor Show and the Watchmakers Exhibition. And it's a city of luxury, which is really nice because you don't actually have to indulge in the luxury, but you can walk around in it. It's the kind of city that feels luxurious wherever you're walking, and you don't have to spend any money to be part of that scene. You can window shop, you can go have tea or coffee in a luxury establishment, and people are well dressed in the streets. There's an air of affluence in Geneva. It gives it a sort of a cocooning ambiance. A very nice, small, human-sized, wealthy, but very friendly city.
And you say wealthy and an air of affluence. As I recall, it is one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. I recall looking at that when my daughter decided to study abroad in Geneva. So it's one of the reasons that I looked at that.
That is true.
What would you recommend for an itinerary for Geneva? Where would you start?
If someone's visiting Geneva, first of all, I would think that Geneva itself is probably a place that would take about 2 or 3 days to visit properly. You could spend a week here and not go to the same part of town twice, but in 2 or 3 days, you should be able to see the highlights. So for me, the highlights are the International Geneva, all the UN, the World Health Organization, the human rights, all these different parts of the international side of Geneva, the Red Cross Museum. These things all have meaning. You know, the Red Cross was started in Geneva. So this is the place where you can really find out about the world's humanitarian agenda. So I would spend some time looking at those things.
Okay, so in terms of specifically looking at those things, you mentioned one thing that we can specifically do, which is the Red Cross Museum. What else would we do in that international portion of Geneva?
The one other thing I definitely do is go visit the United Nations. This is the European headquarters of the UN, and they have tours for visitors every day. And that's something that's worth seeing. If you like internal design, if you like post-war architecture, it's absolutely fascinating as a building. And the guided tours are filled with history as well. And it's across the street from the Red Cross Museum, so you can do both of those in one day.
Now, I'm trying to put it on a mental map, having been to Geneva just once. Is that the one that's just in front of the landmine memorial?
Yes, if you're referring to the broken chair.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So what you have is when you take the tram from downtown, you end up at the broken chair, you get off there, and then you have to walk up the hill because that front entrance, which has all the flags in front of it, is no longer open to the public for security reasons. So now you have to walk up. It's quite a hike up the hill, but there is a bus that goes up there if you don't feel like walking. And you walk up the hill and go in the side entrance to the UN where they have all the security and where you get your bag checked and so on. And that's on the right side is the UN, and on the left side across the street is the Red Cross Museum.
Excellent. Now, I do think we need to explain the broken chair. It's not just some folding chair that's sitting in the middle of the square that is broken.
I don't have the actual measurements, but it's quite huge. It's a giant sculpture. And I think the broken chair, if I'm not mistaken, it was a symbol of Handicap International to begin with, but it's a memorial to the victims of landmines and cluster bombs. And because there are a number of agencies in Geneva that deal with this was deemed to be an appropriate thing to put there, but it was only going to be temporary. And it became so popular that it stayed. And for every person who loves it, there is a person who hates it in Geneva. I think some people think it just defaces the front of the UN and shouldn't be there. I personally love it.
Excellent. Where would we go after the international neighborhood?
That would take about half a day to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there should be some time spent down around the lake, walking around to the jet d'eau, the water fountain, which is quite impressive. In fact, if you fly into Geneva, you will see it. There's no way that you cannot see that. It's that huge, unless it's turned off. Sometimes it is turned off.
Yeah, I was there in the winter time when it was...
It is on in winter, but it depends on the weather.
Yeah, when I was there. Mm-hmm. So just so we're clear what you're saying jet d'eau, which is literally jet of water. And
Exactly.
It's just, when we talk about it being a fountain, it's just a single jet of water that shoots very high up into the air and can be seen from large portions of the city.
It can. It's 550 feet tall. Apparently, every second it spouts out enough water to fill 4 entire bathtubs. Yeah, that's a big fountain.
Yeah, I honestly didn't know what the scale was. I'm looking at a picture of it right now, so I knew it was huge, but I didn't know it was that high. Interesting. Okay, so that we're down along the lake. What are we going to do besides admire the fountain? What else are we going to do in that neighborhood?
What you can do is you can literally walk around the lake at the Geneva end. It would probably take about half a day if you were going to stop everywhere. Mm-hmm. Basically, I would start at the Parc Mon Repos. It means Park My Rest or My Repose, which is in the direction of the United Nations and the international part of Geneva. You've got some very old and stately mansions there that have been transformed into international non-governmental organizations or small agencies, people that deal with conflict resolution, humanitarian development, things like that. And so along those houses are some beautiful gardens that lead right down to the lake. So if you start around there, it's just physically beautiful, and you're looking across on a clear day at the other side of the lake, and you can see the Alps in their full glory. If you start walking towards Geneva, your first stop would probably be the Bain des Paquis, the baths of the Paquis. What that is a mixture of an urban beach with steam baths, and in winter, it serves one of the best fondues in Geneva. So I would definitely stop there if it was winter, or if you feel like jumping into the lake. It's got a very nice little beach and a bunch of other little amenities. It's a very hip place. So that'd be another place.
You mentioned fondue in the winter. Fondue is
Yes.
a winter food, unlike those of us who eat it all year round.
Yes. It's not considered a very good idea to eat it in summer because it's extremely heavy. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of places that specialize in fondue do offer it in summer because that's when you happen to be there. And it's not fair that you should go all the way to Geneva and not try a fondue.
That seems fair enough to me.
So from the Bain des Paquis, then you would keep walking down towards Geneva, and you would have a few monuments on your right-hand side, and you would be passing such landmarks as Christie's Auction House and some of the major luxury hotels like the Hilton and the Berg and all these places. And then you would cross where the lake becomes the river is where you would cross. There's a bridge there. There are several, in fact. Mm-hmm. And then you would go over to the other side. And the first thing you would run into is a very popular tourist attraction, which is the flower clock. And that's a clock which is made out of grass and of flowers, which get changed regularly. Each time you go, it's different. Sometimes it's spectacular. At other times, it's extremely boring. It depends on the gardener's mood, I think, and on the season of the year.
Is that in the English Garden?
That's right next to the English Gardens.
Okay.
So right after that, you would walk into the English Gardens. And if you keep walking, you'll end up in the Geneva Marina, which is very pleasant, as marinas are. In summer, there's some great ice cream places. This is where everybody comes in rollerblades. It's the walk of Geneva. And it takes you all the way down to the jet d'eau. So that whole walk, if you're walking nonstop, would probably take you about 30 or 40 minutes. If you nip into a couple of places on your way, it'll take a little bit longer. But it's a very pleasant walk. On a beautiful sunny day, you get some wonderful photographs.
Well, you mentioned on a beautiful sunny day, and we've mentioned being there in summer. What is the best time of year, in your opinion, for when you should visit Geneva?
Geneva weather is remarkably fickle. Usually in June, June and September, you're probably going to be relatively lucky. Now, July is gorgeous. It's very beautiful in terms of weather. It's also extremely crowded and prices go up. August is very dangerous for your wallet because that's when the entire Gulf state population moves to Geneva. It's so hot in the Gulf states that everyone has an apartment or rents a hotel room in Geneva during the first 2 weeks of August, maybe even into the end of July. And the city changes character completely. It's actually quite fun because it becomes a lot more diverse. It's filled with people from the Middle East. The culture of Geneva actually changes during that period, but I wouldn't recommend going then because you won't find any place to stay. Prices will be higher than ever. Circulation in downtown Geneva is stopped because they have fireworks and all sorts of other wonderful things. So I would say June is a good time. July is getting crowded. September is nice as well. I would not go in November. In winter, as of January, February, you can have beautiful, clear, crisp days, and it's quite nice as well. May could be nice too. It depends. It's a very strange phenomenon. You know, I was telling you earlier, I live in France, but I only live about 40 or 50 kilometers from Geneva on the other side of a mountain. I leave my house in bright sunshine. I go through the tunnel under the mountain, come out the other side, and I'm in fog. And I will stay in fog all day in Geneva until I return home. So when the fog actually goes down into the city, it seems to be blocked by the two mountain ranges that converge there. And as a result, you have this sort of fog bowl. It won't dissipate for days, but you can't tell. It is absolutely unpredictable when it comes to weather.
Interesting. In terms of times to go, are there any particular days or festivals that you would recommend being in Geneva?
The one time of year that is kind of interesting is the 1st of December, which is not necessarily everybody's choice for traveling to Switzerland. They have a race in the old town called l'Escalade, which harks back to, I think it was in the 16th century when the Savoyards, the people of Savoy. Ooh, then it was the 17th century. My bad. When the Savoyards tried to storm Geneva and were repelled down the walls of the city with cauldrons of hot oil. And nowadays they've replaced the hot oil with chocolate.
Hot stew.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, well, that might have been worth waiting for then.
Yeah.
But these days it's chocolate. These days, just before l'Escalade, in every little shop in Geneva, you have these tiny little chocolate cauldrons that are for sale, these little symbols of the Escalade. So that's
filled
definitely
with marzipan vegetables, which is how you should know it was.
You know more about this than I do.
No, we visited, when my daughter studied there, we visited on my birthday, which was December 14th, and that happened to be the closing day of the Escalade. The Escalade is usually held on the closest weekend to the 12th of December. And yeah, so the Savoy, a country that is no longer there anymore, but used to go down to Nice, invaded, and they invaded at night. And so the only people awake were the bakers, and then they sounded the alarm, and then they had these kettles of stew that had been on the fire. And so that was what they dumped on, basically on the invading people, was their leftovers.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really glad to be doing this show with you because I'm learning a lot about Geneva. Thank you.
Well, and the thing that I found fascinating with this is we're talking about a time period, of muskets and pikes, and there's a lot of reenactors who are hiking around the town and fife and drum bands and from people of all ages during that time period. So it's a fascinating, wonderful time. I've got some videos on the site of the Escalade, and then it culminates in this night parade, basically to remember the night attack. It's a wonderful time to be there. Yeah,
which is called La Marmite, I believe.
Okay, I'll take your word for that. I did not remember that. But yeah, fascinating time to be in Geneva.
So that's one possible time. Otherwise, there is this period that I talked about, which is in early August, when you have the Fête de Genève, the Fête of Geneva.
Or the Geneva party.
Well, yeah, party. It is a party. It's a street party.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of things going on, cultural things, music things. There's the largest fireworks in Europe.
Oh, really? Interesting.
On one of the nights, yes. For that, of course, you have to reserve well ahead of time because, as you can imagine, Geneva at that time is absolutely full, and that's in early August.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a car fiend, there's the Geneva Auto Show, which is world famous. That's in March. If you're a car fiend, you should come then. And if you're not, you should stay away. There is not a room to be had within 100 kilometers of Geneva during the 10 days of the auto show. You can't get on a bus. It is absolute madness. So just stay away. I usually travel during those dates on purpose.
Well, and I noticed you said within 100 meters. The one thing you mentioned, flying to Geneva, it's also very well connected on rail because we're talking Europe. In fact, we got to Geneva from Paris by rail because we spent a couple days in Paris and then just walked over to the Gare de Lyon. And it's, I think, about the same time as getting there by air by the time you figure going out to the city to get on an airplane. So,
Absolutely.
Wonderfully connected by rail and obviously right there in the middle of Europe. So it sounds like other than at the time of the auto show, it's possible that if you want to save a little money, you can stay a little further out of town and take the rail in.
You can. There are lots of places out of town. In fact, if you're coming to Geneva, probably you shouldn't stay in Geneva. This is the one place that you might think of avoiding in terms of finding a hotel room. I mean, if you're looking for anything under $100 a night, you're thinking of a hostel bunk bed. Anything over $100 a night, you might find one or two small hotels, but really to find any kind of a decent hotel, you're going to be paying $200 and above. So my recommendation would be to not stay in Geneva, and you've got two possibilities. You can either go further along the lake down to Nyon or down to Morges, any one of these little towns along the lake, because the rail system, as you say, is so good that you can just hop on the train and get into Geneva, although it's not cheap. But the other option, which is the one that I would recommend, is to stay in Ferney-Voltaire, which is a suburb that is literally on the other side of Geneva. In fact, when you land in Geneva at the airport, that airport is international. It's divided into two sides. You've got the Swiss side and the French side. That's how close you are to Ferney-Voltaire. And the French side is in Ferney. So you could almost walk to some of these hotels, or it will take you 10 minutes on the bus, if that. And you've got some perfectly acceptable hotels at less than half the price in Ferney-Voltaire. So if you stay there, there's a city bus that goes by every half an hour that takes you into the city, or you can get an Uber, or you can get a taxi if you feel like spending money with an international taxi because they have to cross the border. But stay in Ferney, ride into Geneva, and then go back in the evening if you'd rather spend your money on something else than your hotel room. Otherwise, please do spend it in Geneva.
Excellent. Other neighborhoods we want to cover in Geneva. We haven't been to the Old Town, for instance, yet.
The nice thing about the Old Town is that it is literally downtown. So while you're in the banking district or in the shopping district, just walk one block uphill and you're in the Old Town. It's very sweet. It's got cobblestones. It's got the Saint-Pierre Cathedral, which is more of a Protestant temple than a cathedral. It's rather bare and more austere than you would imagine a Catholic cathedral to be, because it is a Protestant church, but it's very lovely, and you can go up to the top and get a view of Geneva from there. So the Old Town is also filled with restaurants and bars and places to have a good time at. It's a cute little old town. I'm saying that I'm using the word cute because it's small. It's very compact. It's not going to take you very long. There are maybe 4 or 5 main streets that you can walk up and down, and then you've pretty much covered it.
Well, and to put it in perspective, you were mentioning that the Protestant cathedral there is bare. You really wouldn't have liked it during Calvin's time because they melted down the organ to make pewter plates for the poor because they thought it was too ostentatious. So it's not quite as bare as it used to be, let's just say. In fact, I think we had a chance to hear a concert in the cathedral, and it was quite lovely. During the Escalade, they have different things going on, and there was a choral group that was singing in there.
And that's actually something you will find during the year. It is used for concerts. And because of the acoustics, it's very much worth going there if a concert is given.
Absolutely. Excellent. Anything else we want to hit to in terms of sites that people should do?
Yes. Absolutely. Apart from the old town, there's also another part of town that I highly recommend, and that is Carouge. It's actually its own city. It's not part of Geneva, but it's about 4 tram stops from downtown Geneva. So you could even walk there in half an hour. It's really not very far. It's on the other side of one of the rivers that flows into Geneva. And it's an old Sardinian town. And it's kept a lot of its atmosphere with small, winding streets, older buildings. And for now, it's become a sort of evening jaunt for Geneva people. Geneva closes down early at night, and it's a much more sort of quiet and respectable place. Carouge is it's more studenty, it's more flashy, it's fun. People spill out into the streets at night in summer. There's markets outdoors. It's a very friendly little place, and you've got tons of restaurants, bars, little boutiques. There's no sort of globalized shopping in Carouge, and it's so close to Geneva, it's definitely worth taking a little trip for half a day or spending an evening there when you're in Geneva.
Excellent. Where else?
How about day trips out of Geneva? Because the most wonderful thing about Geneva is how close you are to some absolutely fantastic sites, whether they're in Switzerland or France. If you're staying in Switzerland, you could travel along the lake. The train literally takes you by the lake. You've got some spectacular views all the way to the end, to Montreux. It's very beautiful. And from there, you can catch a train to Gruyère, home of the Gruyère cheese, so to speak. That's a lovely little excursion for a day. Gruyère is a tiny town. It's a one-street town, but every house is lovingly renovated and restored. It's very beautiful. And although it is a very touristy place, the fondue and the raclette you eat there are authentic and they are delicious. So it is worth going to eat there, spend a couple of hours walking around, visiting the chateau and visiting a rather odd museum that they have there whose name I don't remember, which was done by the guy who did the special effects for Alien. This is the joy of being 63, is that names escape me. Anyways, I think a day trip to Gruyère would be a really fun way to cap off part of a trip to Geneva. And there's also Chamonix, which is the home of the Mont Blanc, of course. That's also very easy to get to from Geneva. There are shuttle buses that leave Geneva Airport, although you have to reserve ahead of time, but it only takes about an hour and 15 minutes. And that's a fantastic day trip. You go to Chamonix, which is a wonderful hiking center in summer, wonderful skiing center in winter, and take the cable car up all the way to the Aiguille du Midi and get the most spectacular view of the entire region's Alps that you can possibly imagine on a clear day. That's a day trip from Geneva, and it would take you all day. And the other day trip that I would like to recommend is also in France, and that is to Annecy, which is a little town in France. It's the sort of provincial capital, but it's very lovely, and it's only half an hour or 45 minutes by bus from Geneva. You can easily catch a bus to go there. What's nice about Annecy is that on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, they have a street market with food, but delicious local foods. And if you happen to be there on the last Saturday of the month, there's a fabulous antique market that spreads all the way across town under the old arcades. And the town looks a little bit like a tiny corner of Venice. It's got 3 or 4 canals going through it, a few little bridges over the canals, and of course, wonderful food as you would expect to find in a place that's Savoy, near Switzerland, Alpine, and France. Those are the day trips that I would recommend out of Geneva.
Okay. You mentioned a museum in Gruyère, and it looks like that's the H.R. Geiger Museum.
Thank you. Yes, it is. That's exactly the museum.
And then you also mentioned raclette, that we could eat the fondue or the raclette. And I'm going to ask you to define that because I'm not sure that everybody knows what that is.
Raclette is, it's basically melted cheese, but it comes in different kinds. It's wonderful stuff.
It is the purest form of melted cheese dinner, even more so than fondue in Switzerland.
It is. So it comes in various forms. If you're going to a more modern restaurant, they will melt the cheese in the kitchen and bring it to you on these little trays or on a plate with boiled potatoes, sometimes with cured meats and with pickles and pickled onions. And you scrape the melted cheese, put it on the boiled potatoes, and just lay back and enjoy. However, if you're in an Alpine restaurant or in a more traditional restaurant, they'll bring the cheese to your table. And and the cheese, it sits on a sort of a grill. And so the grill melts the cheese, and you use a wooden spatula to scrape the cheese. Sometimes you get a whole half wheel, and you scrape the cheese onto your plate and your potatoes, and you eat it that way. And I think that's a lot more fun. But you do have to be careful, because I once turned around a little brusquely, and the entire machine went flying. I had a whole restaurant standing around me, oohing and eyeing. So those machines are lethal.
And then the other thing I want to say in terms of museums, since you mentioned that one, the other one I would recommend, so not quite as far away, just a little bus ride out of town, is the Bodmer Library in Colony, Switzerland. So just right next to Geneva. It's a suburb of Geneva, and it's a significant library in terms of old manuscripts. We really enjoyed it. It doesn't take a long time to see it, but they do have things like a Gutenberg Bible and things like that. So quite interesting. Martin Luther's 95 Thesis and a first print of that, which is significant censure in a city that was defined by its Protestantism.
Absolutely. And if I can add another little museum to that, it would be the Tavel Museum. It's on several floors, and one of the exciting things about that museum is it's got a scale model of 19th century Geneva on the top floor, and it's a history museum of Geneva. That's definitely worth visiting as well.
Excellent. Anything else we want to do in Geneva before we get to some of the overview questions?
There's a few little fun things. What about the red light district and the Smurf buildings?
Yeah, I know nothing about what you're talking about.
Well, just to go a little bit lowbrow, Geneva has a red light district. It's really quite out in the open. It's a bit shocking in the sense that this is not the kind of Switzerland you imagine when you're coming to Geneva, but there it is. There are women lining the streets and standing on first floors, showing off in front of the open windows. But what's interesting in that part of town is that it's incredibly mixed. So you've got people wearing business suits walking around. You've got some very good gyms in there. If you go to the very end of the red light district, you've got some UN agencies. If you go 2 blocks further on the other side, you've got the lake. So it's quite a mixed place. This is where all the Middle Eastern restaurants are, for example, and a lot of Turkish kebab places. It's very mixed, and it's perfectly safe. There's nothing wrong with walking around, but certainly if you're in Geneva and the spirit moves you, maybe just a quick stroll through there in the early hours of the evening. I wouldn't necessarily go too late at night, but just around sunset, you get a quick taste of it, come out the other end. And then there's an architectural. For some people, it's an eyesore. For other people, it's architectural genius. I don't know if you know the cartoon characters, the Smurfs. They're little blue people, and they live in strange-shaped houses. So some architects built buildings in downtown Geneva according to the Smurf School of Architecture. I can't describe them. They're odd colors. They have odd protrusions, round things, bubbles, spikes, waves. They're really worth seeing, and they're all near the train station in downtown Geneva. You can just go walk around. They'll catch your eye if you walk in the area near the train station. That, to me, is worth a quick little nip.
Interesting. It looks like something that could have been done by Gaudi. I mean, it's that style.
It is, but maybe not as fine. I think you're absolutely right. It's more cartoon character-y.
And I see here they were inspired by the Spanish artist Gaudi, so I wasn't completely mistaken there.
No, but I think inspired, and then they simplified Gaudi's visions, I think, because Gaudi has a lot of mosaics and a lot of intricacies in his work, and this is a little less intricate.
Interesting. I don't know where the red light district is in Geneva, for those of you who were wondering, but I do know that my daughter stayed in a building that was apparently an ex-brothel, which was the nickname they had for the dorm that these students were staying in, which, isn't the sort of thing you want to tell your parents. But anyway, we mentioned melted cheese. Are there other culinary things that we want to do while we're in Geneva besides melted cheese?
You could eat perch. Once in a while, there is perch from the lakes. Filet de perche is what it's called in French. They can be quite delicious, either in a buttery lemon sauce or with tartar sauce. So that's definitely a specialty of the region, of the entire lake region, in fact. Those are the main specialties.
And we're doing a lot of French pronunciation. Obviously, this is a French-speaking city, but also being an international city, a city where English is widely spoken.
It is. You have absolutely no problem speaking English in Geneva because there are so many tourists, and also there are some 30,000 some international civil servants, and their common language is English as well. So unless you go to a really small village way out of Geneva, you're always going to find somebody who speaks English without any problem at all.
Excellent. Anything else before we get to my last 4 questions?
I don't know what your last 4 questions are, so no.
You listen to the show more often, you would know this.
I'm sorry.
You're standing in the prettiest spot in all Geneva. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
One of the most beautiful spots in Geneva for me would be to stand on the Ile Rousseau. It's a tiny little island right next to the Mont Blanc Bridge and look out towards the city, the jet d'eau, and the Alps beyond. That's an absolutely beautiful view.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Geneva.
I promise I'm going to listen to your show. Only in Geneva would you litter by mistake, of course, and throw your bus ticket on the street or something and have a little old lady come up behind you, bend down, pick it up, hand it to you as though you had dropped something and say, "Excuse me, is this yours?"
A clean city. I am getting the impression from that. We're not talking about Paris.
It can be a clean city, although these days it's not as clean as it used to be. But when I said a little old lady, I mean that there is a generation of people in Geneva who still remember when the city was absolutely clean and want to keep it that way. They haven't noticed that it has degraded a little bit.
Interesting. Finish this thought. You really know you're in Geneva when what?
When you try to find a place to eat on Sunday night and you have to walk for miles and miles and you still don't find anything.
Because things are closed?
Yes. Yes, there are times where things are closed and you just can't find anything to eat.
Interesting. So unlike Paris or Spain or something that have cities that stay open much later and that eat much later, Geneva, if you want something to eat, you need to eat earlier.
You do need to eat earlier. You also need to make sure that if you're going to eat on a Sunday or a Monday sometimes, that you check to make sure that the restaurant is open, because a lot of restaurants have a closing date. They're not necessarily open every day.
Okay. Well, and we mentioned restaurants here. Do you have a few restaurants that you would recommend? Your favorites in Geneva? Either high-end or little holes in the wall, either one.
Eating in Geneva can be an adventure. It can be a culinary adventure. It can be a financial adventure. I think that the prices are horrendous. They really, really are. It's enough to give you indigestion, so preferably you don't eat for 2 days before going into a restaurant. But there are indeed some places where you can eat cheaply. One of them is my favorite, which is the upstairs cafeteria at the Manor department store, which is almost across the street from the main train station. That's a very good deal. There's also something called Chez Ma Cousine, at my cousin's, and they specialize in roast chicken, and you can usually get that for $15, which is considered rock bottom prices. Pizzerias aren't bad either, but this Chez Ma Cuisine you find in a few neighborhoods, so that's worth going to. And then, of course, you have at the complete other end, if you really want to taste Geneva luxury, you can always go to the Auberge du Lion d'Or, the Auberge of the Golden Lion, and that's been around for decades, ever since the first time I came to Geneva many, many years ago, and it's still right at the top of its game. It's got a beautiful view over Geneva, but you expect to pay $200 for a discovery menu, and that's before any alcohol is involved. So that's a $400 meal right there, but it's one of the top restaurants in Geneva. And by the way, that price range is not unusual at all. You can expect to be paying that kind of price in a high-end restaurant very easily. And then there's also, if you're looking for a sort of more typical cheesy as in cheese, kind of restaurant with local specialties. In the Old Town, there's a restaurant called Les Armures, the Coats of Arms. It's quite well known. It's got decent service. The food is nice. It's not horrendously expensive, and you can have your fondue there. And there's a few other restaurants. My one favorite cafe is called the Café du Soleil, the Cafe of the Sun, which has these other best fondue in town. The first one is at the Bain des Paquis, the Baths of the Paquis, down by the lake. And this is the other one. It's absolutely delicious fondue, but they also have really good food. Prices are low. It's open all day, every day, from 7 o'clock in the morning until late at night. It's relatively near the United Nations type area. So you have a lot of international workers who go there, but you also have the local baker and butcher who go hang out there too and have their early morning coffee and cognac on the way to their jobs. Very nice, diverse sort of cafe place that I enjoy, the Café du Soleil.
I'm not sure that I would be as productive after a cafe and cognac in the morning, but I am not Swiss.
Just go at lunch and have the fondue.
Okay. Excellent. Last question. If you had to summarize Geneva in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Beautiful. Diverse.
Okay.
And compact.
Excellent. Excellent. Our guest again has been Leyla Giray Alianak. And Leyla, where can people read more about your travels?
They can read my blog at womenontheroad.com.
And do you have a great article about Geneva that we really ought to highlight for them?
I have a couple of articles about Geneva and about Carouge, the neighborhood I was talking about that is near Geneva. Yeah, please just go to my blog and have a look. You'll find them there.
We'll put a link to those in the show notes. In fact, they'll be in the lyrics of this episode if you take a look. Leyla, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
In News of the Community, I heard from Liesel, who said, "Can the theme song be downloaded as a ringtone? I know it could several years ago. I have recently updated my phone and would like to add it." Well, thanks, Liesel. It made my day that you asked, even. It used to be available as a ringtone. I haven't seen that many ringtone creators in a long time. For those of you who don't know, the Amateur Traveler theme song, that is the title of it, Amateur Traveler theme song. It is written just for the show. In fact, I wrote the lyrics for the second verse, but Jeff Smith wrote the theme song. And I will put a link in the lyrics of this episode and in the show notes of this episode of where you can get it as an MP3 file. And if you would like to use that MP3 file to create a ringtone for your phone for personal use, please feel free to do so. It just tickles me pink that you might be interested. Digging a little further back in the archives, I heard a few months back from Amy, who said, "Hi, Chris, longtime listener, first-time writer. Just wanted to say a quick thank for making my exercise time fly by as I listen to your podcasts. My husband always knows when a new podcast is out because I return from my walk and announce, we have to add XXX to our list of vacations. Oh, also, I have a suggestion for a future podcast. How about the Algarve in southern Portugal? We're going in 2018 and would love to listen to a podcast on it before. Happy Thanksgiving." That shows you how long it's been since I heard from Amy. Amy, we have actually done a show. It's been quite a while since we did a show on the Algarve. It was episode 108 of The Amateur Traveler. So you're right. It is probably about time to talk about southern Portugal again. If anyone wants to volunteer to be a guest, let me know. As I said at the beginning of the show, I certainly hope some of you will join my wife and I in Japan in June. More details on that on the website, or if you're not sure where, just drop me an email and I'll point you at it. Or in India in November. Really looking forward to meeting some of you and traveling with you as I have the last couple years and had a great time with both of those groups of people. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have a question, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram, or you can follow me to Japan. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.